All right, guys, so in this video, we're going to continue working with CSS, and we're going to start working with typography. So typography is just all the text. We can change the font that the text uses, and we can change the size. And there's other things we can change, but we're just going to focus on those for now. We're going to try some different fonts. There's a lot of different fonts. There's another website for this called CSS Font Stack. This is a really useful website for seeing the different typefaces that you can use. And there's two main types of typefaces. You may be familiar with this if you've taken History of Graphic Design or MMA 100, but you may not be familiar with this at all if this is the first time you're thinking about typography. So I'll go over some of the basics. So there are two main types of typography. Sans serif is sort of a more modern style of typography that is very common on the internet. It's very common, for example, in the subway. All the signage in the subway uses sans serif. These are fonts that don't have the kind of little feet that you see on the classical serif typography. So that's what sans means. Sans is, I think, French for without, and serif is those little feet adornments that you see on serif fonts. So there's a bunch of sans serif fonts. The nice thing about CSS Font Stack is it shows you which fonts are sort of supported by different platforms. So for example, Arial is a very common font. It has 99% support on Windows and 98% on Mac. So if you use Arial as your font face, you're almost guaranteed to have it appear correctly. If we look at our website and let's inspect it, remember to get the inspector, you can right-click and go to Inspect. You can also click on the menu and go to More Tools and go to Developer Tools. And that brings you to the Element section, and then you can see the styles in this sort of drop-down section here. And one of the things we can see with our styles, so let's click on a H1, and let's bring this guy up a little bit. You can see, no, we actually don't see it here. But if we look at the computed font, this is the actual font, and we look at, oh, we don't see it here either. Interesting. So we don't actually see, oh, here it is. So the rendered font. So the default font for a website, if you don't do any styling, is just Times New Roman. Times New Roman is a really, really common font that's used for the New York Times and newspapers and things like that. And it's just the font that you see here, just this kind of really basic font. So that's what it's going to look like unless we change the font. And so all the fonts on this page are fonts that are built in to different browsers. So for example, another popular font is Helvetica. This is 100% supported on Mac, but interestingly, it's only 7% supported on Windows. So if you use a Helvetica font, it may not work on a Windows computer. Down here, we see the serif fonts. We'll probably see Times New Roman. You can see it's 97% Mac, 99% Windows. So pretty much every computer supports Times New Roman, but there's other fonts like Dido is a popular font for Mac, 0% on Windows. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're choosing fonts, is that some fonts may not work on another computer, and that's why we have a way of doing a backup font. So let's change the font for our H1. We can use something a little more interesting. So let's go with, let's see. I kind of like this avant-garde, but it's 0% on Windows and 1% on Mac. So that's not a very good choice, although it might be good to use for an example. Let's see. Okay, Futura, high support on Mac, not on Windows. Let's just see if it works. I'm just kind of curious. So I'm just going to put this into the Chrome Inspector Tools. I'm going to put Font Family and then just write Futura. And okay, so we can see that it doesn't work. So that's a good example of something that doesn't work. Let's see if we can find one that does. Okay. Okay, how about Seago UI? Let's try that. Font Family Seago UI. Okay. I guess that didn't work either. Let's see if I get rid of this monospace. Okay, so neither of those worked on this computer. Let's try something with a high level of support. Verdana looks like it has a high level of support. Okay, there we go. So you can see that those first two fonts didn't really work, but my Verdana font did. There's a way to deal with this. So if you really like Futura, but you want to back up, you can say font family. So font family is just the typeface that we're using. And you could say Futura, but then you could say comma and then Verdana. And so what that'll do is it'll use Futura if it's available, but if not, it'll use Verdana. So we have a backup that matches the general style that we want, but will be accepted by more computers. So let's write that in. All right, so let's put that font family rule in. So we'll say font family. And again, you can see with Sublime, when you start to type in a rule, it gives you all these other rules. So you might want to play around with some of those and see what they do. It can be a little tricky at first, but you can try different stuff out. So we're going to say Futura and Verdana. And so now if we refresh the page, we'll see Futura and Verdana. And if we go to computed, we'll see that we're getting that Verdana font because the Futura doesn't exist. So that's one way to do fonts, and there's obviously a lot of fonts to choose from, but some of them have more support and others don't. So if you want to add a font to your page, but you will know that it's going to work everywhere, another way to do this is to load a font, a specific font family or a typeface into the browser, through CSS. So there's different ways to do this. I'm going to go over one that is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to use Google Fonts. So if you go to fonts.google.com, this is a website that just has a bunch of free fonts for you to use. And you can even, type something in. You could say, choose your own adventure. And so we can see what it's going to look like when we try different fonts. And so if we scroll through here, they kind of have different types of fonts. I want to use something for the body font, so I don't want to use something that's too crazy like this holy font here. So let's see. Let's go to. I want to use this sans serif. This is kind of interesting. This super ellipse, or actually glyphic, is kind of nice. I kind of like these glyphic styles. So these kind of describe different styles, and then you can see some of the options. So let's see. Let's actually see what we can get under here. Let's see. This is a pretty nice one. I'm just going to choose this one just for the sake of time. I'm just going to grab one. So you can choose a font, and then it'll show you some different styles. So with fonts, you often have some of them will not have this, but some of them will have a lot of different styles. And to save on time for loading, you can choose which styles you want. So I'll probably just do this regular 400. Let me see if there's a. Okay, yeah, I'll probably just do the regular, but you can see there's bolder styles, there's italic styles, there's a whole bunch of different styles available for this font, and you can choose them here. If I go to regular 400 and then click Get Font, it's going to generate some embed code that I can use. So if I click on this Get Embed Code, there's a couple different ways to do this. You can do it in HTML, which is what this link section will do, but I want to put it in CSS, so I'm going to go to Import. And then you can see the value here. This actually has a lot of weights. So let's see, can I change that? Okay, so let's change the style. So yeah, actually I'll leave these on. I don't know, maybe we want to do something italic at some point. Anyway, you can copy this, but the only issue is it has some HTML in here. I don't know why they do that, but it says embed in the head of your HTML. we don't really want to do this because we want it to apply to all of our pages, and so we don't want to have to put this in every single HTML page. So instead, I'm just going to copy the style part and put that in my style sheet. So I'm going to copy that section and go back to my Sublime. And the only thing we have to be careful about here is that this has to go before, at the top of our program before we try to use it. So I'm going to go up to the top of the program and paste this in. And it's very long, so that's okay. If you see something like this in Sublime, one thing you can do is go to View and go to Word Wrap, and so that'll wrap it around so you don't have to scroll around. So anyway, we can see the font here, and to use the family, we just use this Noto Sans. We don't have to add the plus. It's a little confusing, but the plus you can't have in a URL, or sorry, you can't have a space in a URL, so they use a plus here, but we can just use a space. So for my paragraphs, I'm going to use this font style. I'm going to say paragraph and then font family. And then for this one, I have to use quotation marks, I think. So I'm going to do Noto Sans with quotation marks. And let's go back and see if that worked. And there we go. And so this is going to work on Windows or Mac. It doesn't matter, either one. And so that's a way that you can add your own font, or not your own font, but a font that you find on Google, or if you create a font, you could do that too. Let me see if it works without the quotation marks. I just want to check. Okay, so you actually don't need the quotation marks. So, excuse me, we can just write Noto Sans, and we've got a font family. So those are font families or typefaces. We can also change the size of a font. So the H1 kind of by default is going to be a little bit bigger than our default font. So you can see the font size for the H1 is 2EM. EM is sort of a funny term, but it just means one of EM just refers to like the basic font size. And so if you have 2EM, you have 2 times whatever the default font size. And the default font size for a browser is 16 pixels. So you can see if I go to the body section and I say font size and I say 16 pixels, nothing's going to change. But now if I click on the body, let me move this down a little bit. I'm going to click on the body. If I click on this 16, I can test using bigger sizes. So you can see I can go up to 17, 18, 19, 20. And you can see that the paragraph and the header increase and decrease relative to each other. So that EM is a relative measure. So the header is always going to be twice as big as the default font. So that might be, something that you like or not, but we can change that. So I'm going to leave this font size at 20 pixels. I kind of like it being a little bit bigger. So let's reload that. But let's say I don't want the header to be quite so big. We can go to the H1 and we can say font size here. And then instead of 2EM, I'm just going to do 1.5 EM. So this will be 1.5 times this 20 pixels. So that'll be 30 pixels. Okay, so now it's still bigger than the paragraphs, and it's still relative, so they still increase at the same rate, but it's not twice as big, it's 1.5 times as big. So depending on what you want it to look like, that can be a good thing to adjust as well. So again, there's a lot of other things that you can do with typography. The size and the font face, I would say, are probably the main things that you'll want to play around with. But there's lots of other rules that you can play with if you're interested in exploring. And that's something I definitely recommend doing, is exploring. If you have an idea, how might I be able to do something, you can try to look it up on MDN or just Google it, and you'll probably be able to find some results pretty quickly. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for typography, just a basic overview. In the next video, we're going to do some stuff with layout, and then I'll go over submitting the post for this week.